Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for On the Money, presented by Embassy National Bank.
Hi, everybody. This is Joe Moss, and welcome to this week's edition of On the Money, the #1 small business show on Business RadioX. Show is presented by Embassy National Bank. Embassy National Bank is a nationally chartered financial institution whose deposits are insured by the FDIC. On this show, as you know, we discuss topics designed to help small business succeed, because at Embassy National Bank, we are proud of how we help small business. I'm Joe Moss, your host and president at the bank, and we welcome you to the Subaru of Gwinnett studio. We have a repeat guest today, which I'm real excited to have them back in. I think it's very timely they come back in. Want to introduce back to you guys Alfredo Ortiz and Elaine Lutz, who are with the Job Creators Network. Alfredo, the CEO and president, and Elaine, the chief communications officer. They're all about creating jobs and why that happens and why it doesn't happen. So welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you having us.
Alfredo, explain to everybody again what the mission of Job Creators Network is.
Well, the mission of Job Creators Network is to help educate employees in the end through employers. And we believe that by providing that type of educational material and information to the employers, that we can have a better educated workforce overall. And that's one of the best ways that we can avoid having bad government policies become law. And
it's important to understand this, because small business is the group that creates jobs.
It's about 70% of actually new job growth is in the hands of small business owners. So it's an extremely important group across this country. And in fact, just one quick stat, 85 million hardworking Americans in this country depend on the success or failure of small businesses.
85 million.
And I'll get to those numbers in a little bit, but it's an impressive number.
It's very impressive, and I think it's very important to point out that you are nonpartisan. You are actually an educational group.
That's correct.
And you just want to let people know about some of the issues that are out there that would either improve or harm job growth.
That's correct, Joe. We're a national nonprofit pro-business advocacy organization. We are definitely unabashed supporters of the free enterprise system and the opportunity economy. And all this information we want to provide to anybody who is interested in getting this information is available to them free of charge.
And you have some pretty high-profile founders, such as?
We do. Bernie Marcus was actually the founder of this organization, as many folks probably in Atlanta and in Georgia know, is also the founder of the Home Depot.
Right. And I heard him say that if I tried to start Home Depot today, I wouldn't be able to do it.
That's correct. He says that all the time, that in this particular environment of overregulation and taxation and different parts of our challenges out there in terms of regulations like Dodd-Frank and others, that it'd be impossible for him to go from the two-store startup that he had to what it is today, a major success in this country.
Thanks. And Elaine, you've got some big news today about something coming up this summer or this fall?
Yeah, earlier this year we launched a new campaign called the Bring Small Businesses Back campaign. And starting at the end of this month in Aurora, Colorado, we'll be launching a national bus tour, which will go up into the Midwestern states. And literally a bus on the road, meeting with small business owners in cities across the country, with congressional representatives to talk to small business owners about the issues that they're facing. It's interesting. We've done some polling and of small business owners, and only 1 in 5 actually plans to do any hiring this year because of the issues that they're facing and the headwinds. And they cite overregulation, overtaxation, and a lack of access to credit as the 3 top issues that are hurting them and preventing them from expanding their businesses. And so we're reaching out to representatives, U.S. congressional representatives, to hold town hall type meetings with their constituents in their districts and talk to them about these issues, and also talk to them about the tools and the things that they can do through educating their employees about the policies that hurt their businesses and their employees' jobs, and utilizing our employer-to-employee education program and the tools we provide.
And you're welcome in every state, not just red states or blue states. Everybody wants to talk about job creation and helping small business.
Bad government policy hurts your business, whether you're a D or an R.
Right. And I think it's helpful that in most cases, every representative that I know of is going to embrace you, because whatever you're trying to do is ultimately going to help them and the people within their district.
Well, and I think that's absolutely right. And just going back to one fact that Elaine pointed out, the 19% in terms of their expectations of doing any hiring for this year, combined with that other fact that I had just mentioned about the 70% of job growth being in the hands of small business owners, you combine those two facts, it's not a good equation, right? When you've only got 19% of the people having any plans on doing the hiring in the small business area.
Well, we get a lot of small businesses in here, obviously, because that's who we interview a lot of. And you can tell they're nervous. I mean, it's tough. It's not like it was, and a little confused. What do I do? What's the next year look like? A lot of them are changing their plans around every 6 months. Long term is now, when you do a 3-year plan, you better do it for 6 months, because it may change after 6 months. So there's a lot hitting them right now.
And that's correct, Joe. I mean, outside of, I think, the uncertainty aspects of all of what you've just mentioned, when we did the poll and came back that overtaxation, overregulation, of the lack of access to capital and credit were 3 of the key planks that were causing them from really succeeding. When you combine that, right, with all the other elements that are hitting at them, I mean, it's a very tough environment. And there are some fantastic things that are going around in Congress, for example, and things and bills that are looking at what is the impact, for example, of future regulations going forward. But we at Job Creators Network say this is death by 1,000 cuts for our small business owners. Who's actually looking at the other 999 elements before it, right, that are actually bogging them down, that are bringing them down, that are creating our small business owners, in many cases, just to throw up their hands and say, I quit. It's just too much.
Yeah, I heard an interview with someone coming over here that was from Hewlett-Packard, and I'll talk about that toward the end. But I think the one thing that I keep hearing now that it's election season, and oh my gosh, it's just going to take too long, and we're all going to get sick of it. But the one thing that I keep hearing is how the candidates are going to create jobs. Government will create jobs. You hear it on both sides, and I think it's important for everyone to know government doesn't create jobs. Small businesses create jobs. People like you and me create jobs. We're the ones that do that, and we need an environment that allows us to do that.
And that's correct, Joe. I mean, when going back to that 85 million number that I threw out at the beginning of the show, if we break it down a little bit, there are about 28.5 million small business owners in this country. About 5.5 million of those actually employ roughly about 10 people or so. That's 55 million employees, right, in the hands of small business owners. When you combine that with that pool of 28.5 million small business owners, that's the pool of 85 million hardworking Americans. And by the way, those 28.5 million small business owners are also hardworking Americans in this country.
Sure,
and,
absolutely.
And people forget that.
Yeah, and they have trouble sleeping at night, and a lot of them, and some, depending on the cycle, have trouble making any money. And at the same time, though, the payroll is taken care of, and I find that's the story that doesn't seem to get out there sometimes.
Right. Elaine was actually, you were a small business owner. I think you can probably relate with the payroll every 2 week syndrome.
Oh, yeah. You pay your employees before you pay yourself.
Sure.
Make sure that they're taken care of.
Sure. And in fact, I heard a story about a small business owner who had not paid himself for 3 months, but the employees thought he was making too much money. So, and there's a confusion there sometimes about how it really works.
We went 12 months without paying ourselves.
Yeah. Did your employees know?
No.
Yeah, see?
But Joe, you bring up a good example. That is the education element that we're talking about, right? A lot of times our small business owners or business owners, business leaders, they don't know how to talk to their employees. They don't know if they can talk to their employees. And that's what we're there to do at Job Creators Network, is to really help them understand that they can. And how do you do it? How do you have the conversation? And frankly, in a nonpartisan way that just really relates to facts.
Sure. And they all want to hear that because, you've done some polling that indicates that they do.
Correct.
They do. Okay, let's go back to the tour. So what kind of issues are you going to be bringing up? Is it going to be local, national? What do y'all plan to be doing at these different stops?
Well, the stops were, like I said, we're partnering with the U.S. representatives and congressmen in their districts to bring in local business owners, their constituents, to talk to them about the overregulation, overtaxation, and the lack of access to credit. We're excited to announce we actually had our first event in June in the 14th District of Illinois. Representative Randy Holtgren hosted that event, and we were invited to attend. Congressman Holtgren actually just announced the Bring Small Businesses Back Tax Reform Act, which is H.R. 5374. So it's the first legislative action coming out of our campaign to help bring some relief to small businesses. And basically what it's going to do for small businesses is lower the tax rates on the first $150,000 of income to 10% and up to $1 million down to 20%. So it's going to bring some really good relief for small businesses, and that's what they need. And studies show that
these would be C corps that are affected, correct?
These are what they call pass-throughs.
Okay.
Small businesses, partnerships.
Okay.
As corps.
Okay.
And really quickly, Joe, that particular group there, that's about 96% of all the small businesses will benefit from that kind of relief in this country.
Wow. Tell me about the 14th District of Illinois, just real quickly. What does it look like demographically, business-wise? Where is it?
Well, actually, the 14th District is right outside of Chicago. Alfredo actually attended that event and spoke with the constituents there. He can probably give you a really good overview of that.
Yeah, McHenry County is actually where we had the particular event, and it's agricultural, small business. I mean, it's Main Street America. I mean, it really is. It is a beautiful town. I just missed, unfortunately, their fair that was there, but it really is Main Street America, and it's just representative of all the other pieces and other stops. One stop, for example, that we're going to be doing is in Eureka, Missouri. Because again, it's a nice representation of Main Street America and the small business owners and the plight. And one thing I want to emphasize that as we go through and working with congressional leaders and other business leaders, and in many cases, and we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the Georgia tour or the Georgia stop. Again, as I mentioned, when you've got 85 million people who are dependent on the success or failure of small businesses, it doesn't matter if you have a D or an R or an I next to your name. You're being hit the same way. Right. And in one of the particular cases, we had a gentleman that stood up at one of the town halls and said, "Look, I want to be really clear. I'm a Democrat, but I have to tell you, I'm feeling this pain just as much as the next guy. So it really is impacting me."
Right.
And we believe that we can help all these folks. Again, it doesn't matter what your party affiliation is.
Okay. Well, since you said that, Elaine, talk about what you're going to be trying to do here in Georgia.
Well, we're going to be working with State Senator John Albers and hosting two events with him in October 20th and 21st. And so we're expecting some pretty large crowds there. It's interesting, Senator Albers is actually working on a state-level legislation that will mirror the national legislation on the tax reform package that I just mentioned. We're also working with Representative Rob Woodall on the 24th of October.
And actually, if we could chime in on that one, because we're excited. The Gwinnett Chamber has agreed to co-host that with us. And so we'll be doing that on the 24th of October from 9 to 10:30.
You ought to get Business Radio X up there and let them do it.
We would love to have you up there.
Okay. Did you hear that, Mike? I know you're listening out there. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
We'll be heading out to Savannah with Representative Buddy Carter on the 25th of October.
A lot of stuff going on in Savannah. They got the funds now to dig it. The canal, right?
That's correct. And again, I mean, there's just so many opportunities out there. We really are trying to leverage as many congressional business leaders. And again, we encourage anybody, if any congressional business leaders are listening today, please, I'm not sure how we can call out specifically, a website or something like that. You tell me, Joe, if we can do that. But we have plenty of time. We want people to join on this tour.
Yeah, I'm going to be calling around to some of our businesses and see if you can't. We've got one up in North Georgia that may want to try to help. But we'll think about it, try to do something as well.
Great.
I think it'd be very worthwhile. Let's see. Biggest challenges we've talked about. Tax bill we talked about. Let's go through that one more time. So if you are a small business and you operate as either a partnership or a subchapter S or as a pass-through, then how is that going to be affected?
It's going to lower the tax rate for pass-through businesses first $150,000 of income to 10%, and to 20% for their first $1 million of income. It also does a couple of other things. It's going to allow small business to immediately expense all their investment in equipment. And then it's going to simplify cash accounting for tax purposes for all businesses with gross receipts less than $25 million. So in essence, it's going to simplify things for small business, which is what they need so that they can continue doing what they do best, and that's grow and expand their businesses and create more jobs.
I like the last two. I'm not sure I understand. So if I'm a small business owner and I get a K-1, the income on that will be taxed at 10% for the first $150,000.
Right.
Okay, got it. Well, that'll be that's very helpful because right now it's taxed at their marginal personal rate.
That's correct. And Joe, here's the interesting thing. We've actually done survey work on that and research that at that particular level of income, everything under $1 million, small business owners, they don't take their money and run off to the Bahamas with it. They reinvest it back in their businesses, whether it's an additional line, whether it's an additional truck, whether it's a couple new, overhead. They will hire people, they'll buy equipment, and that's going to get the economy back and running. We saw the anemic 1.2% GDP growth. We know we need to accelerate that. Corporations are actually the larger corporations are the ones that are benefiting more so, even though you've seen just recently some of the projected slowdown even from the larger corporations. Mm-hmm. But the small business owner really hasn't seen the recovery, over the past several years.
Let's drop down to the DOL overtime rule because we've been somewhat affected by that. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, it's interesting because we hear a lot from our members about overtime, minimum wage. A lot of those issues are coming out from these unelected bureaucrats, and this is the overregulation that's killing them. But essentially what it does is it doubles the threshold for paying overtime for management employees. And so what companies have been doing across the board is they have to basically look at reclassifying salaried employees to hourly positions so they can better manage their costs, basically. And what employees need to understand is that hurts them because, that's kind of where employees look to their career ladder and they look to get to that salary level. And so they lose benefits by being reclassified into an hourly. They lose flexibility. They lose the ability to put the extra time in, because
which
that's
they probably want to do.
Exactly.
And I got a story about that, by the way. But you're listening to On the Money, brought to you by Embassy National Bank, and we have Alfredo Ortiz and Elaine Lutz from Job Creators Network. This is a not-for-profit group founded right here in Atlanta, and they're all about creating jobs, and that's why we like talking to them. Let me tell you the story about overtime. When I was first starting in an accounting department, in order to energize people, you would be made an officer, which it's not why they did it, but because you're an officer, you're exempt from overtime. And we just like putting in the time to get the job done. And the Georgia Department of Labor came in and found that there were a certain level of people that really weren't operating in an official level, and they went back and assessed overtime on all. They got paid the overtime going back, and that's been around for a while. How has it changed? Is this going to become a federal deal, or they just tightened up the limits, or what?
This came out of the Department of Labor, so it's basically a doubling of that threshold that raises it up, and that's the biggest challenge. Again, since we're really focused on small business, we're concerned about the overall impact on the small business owner.
Okay.
Because whether you have one employee or 10 employees or 1,000 employees, right, it's going to hit all the same. A lot of our small business owners don't have the ability to do that just overnight, to be able to have that kind of labor hit. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, they reward their employees for hard work in different ways, whether it's equity, whether it's profit sharing,
bonuses,
right? Because they just don't have that cash flow to be able to afford that kind of salary on a bi-weekly basis. So we're very concerned about that kind of impact, right? The ability for the small business owner to be able to absorb that.
Now, clearly, we're not all about trying to work somebody to an early grave, but you got to look at the whole picture.
Right.
And how are they being compensated in other ways?
Right. And in many cases, there's also what we call kind of the psychological impact, and what we are hearing from some employees that have worked very, very hard to get from a hourly position to a salaried position where they're not having to punch a clock every day, where they have some flexibility to, go to their, maybe it's a PTA meeting, or whether it's an appointment, and they don't have to keep punching in and out, right? They've worked very hard to get to that point, and now that's being taken away from them.
We got so much we could talk about here today. I want to get back to the educational part of it, and let's talk about a couple things. Why, from my perspective, I think everybody needs to know that every 2 years, our House of Representatives in Washington is reelected. Every 2 years. These are the people that create legislation for these issues. So you have a chance every 2 years to unseat whoever's not doing a good job and put someone in there that you like. I think it's important for people to know. So that's why it's very important to gin up on these issues. And if you go to jobcreatorsnetwork.com, they will give you a list of several things and why it's important to understand the issues. And again, we're not telling people who to vote for. Just go in the booth with an educated vote.
No, I think that's a great point. And Elaine, would you want to comment a little bit on the scorecard that we're going to be putting out in September?
I was just thinking about that. We're actually developing a scorecard where we are going to score all the members of the House as well as the Senate on how they have voted on the issues related to overtaxation regulations and access to credit for small businesses. And so we'll be able to score them, in time for folks to get educated on how their representatives and senators have voted on issues that pertain directly to job creation.
I don't think anybody's doing that now, are they?
Not the way we are. I mean, a lot of organizations...
they judge you on conservatism and all those things, but I like how you're making it very specific about job creation.
Yeah, and the nice part is, I think you can reference, how many folks, whether it's Democrat or Republican. We've got, quite a few, congressional representatives on the Democrat side that are very pro-business friendly, are going to be getting an honorable mention.
Sure they are.
We want to be able to highlight that because, again, we're just focused on these three different elements, not on conservative or not conservative, but really on the elements of business creation and job creation.
That's good. And then the other thing, let's talk about employment for a minute. We always keep hearing this employment number that comes out. In June 16, the unemployment rate was 4.9%, which is down considerably from where it was. I think it was tracking, what's the highest that it hit back in the deep, dark days? Was it?
I want to say it was
probably around 10%.
Yeah, 10%. And it's been tracking down. In Georgia, the unemployment rate is about same as the national average, right? And it's coming down. But, there's a lot more to the story, isn't it? And so I don't Elaine, maybe you ought to walk us through. I'll show you this chart. You can see it out on the website. But why don't you walk us through about what the numbers really are saying?
Well, you really have to look past the headlines of these low unemployment numbers because really it's the labor participation rate, and that's the number of people who are actually actively job seeking. And we have one of the lowest labor participation rates we've had in 30 years.
So walk through those stats.
Well, right now our unemployment rate for June, because the July numbers are actually coming out on Friday, which we're expecting another lackluster month, but we're at about 4.9% unemployment. But the real unemployment rate, if you added everybody back in who's just fallen off the map because they've given up, we're really at 9.6%, which is significant because our labor force participation rate is at 62.7%. We haven't seen those kinds of numbers since Jimmy Carter was president. And that's important to understand that if everybody decided that they'd come off the bench and start looking again, the unemployment rate would skyrocket and you'd see very different headlines.
Right. And the 62% is telling us what? Out of every 10 people, 62% of us that can work, 62% of us are actually working, and 38% can't either given up or at home or whatever.
It's that they've given up because if you're actively seeking a job and you're collecting unemployment, you're counted in there.
Yeah.
These are folks who've just simply given up and they're not even they're not even counted.
Okay. And then there's some other numbers on there, too, that are pretty interesting.
The civilian labor force for June is at about 158 million people. So significant numbers. And when you look at how many are part of the small business numbers and impacted by small business that Alfredo was referencing, you're talking about 85 million people. So
158 minus 85, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's more than half of the civilian workforce is actually associated with small business.
Right.
And what's the sales goal? How do we define small business these days?
Go ahead.
The SBA defines it as under 500 employees.
Under 500 employees. And I think we need to find another moniker other than small business. I saw an ad on TV that I really liked, and people don't like, some of these folks aren't small. They're big thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
And they have a big reach and a big influence, and there's nothing small about them.
No. And in fact, we have internally, we say small business is too big to fail. In fact, I mean, it really is. I mean, when you think about over half of our labor force basically in the hands of small business owners,
right?
That's a big number.
We don't want them to fail.
We can't.
Yeah. It's
Well,
really
when they have
interesting.
things like the Department of Labor overtime issue and minimum wage and the Affordable Care Act and the regulations coming out of that, coming at them, you've got small business owners that are making defensive moves to keep their labor costs and keep their costs in general down instead of figuring out ways to expand their business. That's problematic.
Okay.
And Joe, talking specifically, I mean, and you can appreciate this when you look at Dodd-Frank, for example, and even though
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Even there was some great rationale and reasoning of why that was created and why it passed and became law. There are also, as you know, some unintended consequences. Over 1,000 community banks have gone out of business since Dodd-Frank passed.
Oh, there's an article today about how the number of banks have gone from 11,000 down to 7,000. We've lost 4,000 banks over, I guess, the last 10 years or something.
Right. It's an amazing number, which again goes to the lack of access to credit. And
by the way, I want to interview at Embassy National Bank. We're trying to help that
great
lack of access to credit, but we're also under some of the same rules that everybody else is under. So we've got to be careful how we lend credit. But anyway, keep going.
Right. Well, no, and one of the things I wanted to say is that what we're trying to do is identify and again, any input from your listeners that are in the banking world, we seek that kind of input because we're not necessarily about trying to repeal and replace Dodd-Frank, but to what we call repair and restore, and really try to identify what particular elements, of the Dodd-Frank bill, for example, are actually the most onerous for our community banks that are keeping that small business lending from actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're just trying to be solution focused. We're not here, again, to be partisan about it and to say, that was a horrible bill. But there are unintended consequences that came from that, and we need to identify that and fix them.
Well, one of the things that we keep our eye on is the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and arguably they've done some good work in trying to help people to get from being hit hard with a bad mortgage deal. We all know a lot of folks got money they probably shouldn't have, and you can blame it on the consumer, you can blame it on the banks, you can blame it on the investors, but it happened, and so they're trying to put some stuff in place that's working. But a lot of times that backfires, and I think that the availability of housing credit has fallen, and it's certainly a lot tougher to get a mortgage loan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, and we've got some issues with that. But I guess the thing we look at is the CFPB scope has traditionally been consumer, but now I think it's trying to creep over into small business.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be really watching that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't belong over on small business at all. I think it's good that they're doing what they're doing on the consumer side. I don't agree with their tactics, but we need to be careful that we don't see that creep over on the small business world because that'd kill us.
Mm-hmm.
That would just kill us.
That's a fantastic point. You're absolutely right.
So what else is going on out there? What are y'all hearing from Washington? I guess everybody's packed in for the summer now, correct?
Yeah, they're on recess now, and I think they are probably gearing up for re-election season. But again, that's why we're trying to take the opportunity to try, while people are back in their home districts, to hear about this message and the importance of small business owners. I mean, Joe, if you think about the two conventions, the Democratic and Republican conventions, and how much time was actually spent talking about small business.
No, I didn't hear anything.
Exactly.
I heard a lot about how the government was going to create jobs.
Right, and on both sides, it wasn't discussed. When you've got, again, 85 million hardworking Americans that are dependent on the success or failure of small business, and neither party discussed that in a national 4-day, 8 days total of convention time, and not 1 minute was truly dedicated towards that, we've got a major problem.
And by the way, how do you get, when a legislator goes back, he's going to get hit with all kinds of stuff. And I've talked with one of them about a certain piece of legislation. It was like, okay, I'll stick it in my bag. And I don't blame him because he had so many other things to try to worry about. How do you get these folks focused? Do you have to find one representative that's like you found that wants to promote this tax act? How does all that work? You just got to keep digging and digging and digging?
Unfortunately, that's pretty much what it takes. I mean, there's what we call legislative awareness. That's one of the things that we're trying to do with the tour, right? Make people understand from both parties, right, about the importance of small business owners to this country and what is hurting them, right? In particular, these three different elements. And it's getting in front of them, we now have about 102 associations that are part of our coalition of associations. And we're trying to engage them and get them to help support us to get that message out as well to their members, right? And so we just believe it's like in anything, right? Awareness leads to trial, which leads to repeat, right? In the business world, people will get that. It's the same thing here, right? We just need to keep driving the awareness of these particular challenges and what we're trying to do to help that, to be able to get the attention of congressmen. They do have tough jobs, no matter what party. You've got a tough job because we've got so many problems and so many issues in this country.
I was sitting at dinner, and there were like 3 or 4 of us peppering this one guy, and I remember thinking, I mean, this is probably 1% of what he's hearing every day. I felt for the guy. I mean, how can he make any commitments or promises,
Right. I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, you have to respect every single person who is up in D.C. who's trying to do what they need to do and make a difference and do things the right way. And again, we just hope that we can be another voice out there that is that can serve as advocates for the small business community.
What congressional subcommittee is focused on small business? Do we have one?
Elaine, do you want to?
We actually had one of our CEO members testify on the overtime issue last month, and it was in front of the House Small Business Committee.
Okay.
And he has a tech business, and he spoke from the perspective of how the overtime issue is going to hurt tech startups.
Sure.
Which, it's pretty significant because when you think about the tech industry and these tech startups, I mean, a lot of these folks go through, take big risks to start these companies. They work 100 hours a week with the hopes that what they're developing is going to be successful and pay off, hopefully ownership, shares, a big payoff in the end. The overtime issue significantly hurts that type of industry because it takes away the ability for those folks to do that. And in his case, he was speaking about his sales force. They have an upside to go out there and sell more, but
Sure.
when you're selling, you're working more hours. And if he's got to look at reclassifying all of his employees, it hurts him. So he testified before that committee.
From his standpoint, that's a good point. Let's just say the tech thing is usually driven, a lot of pay comes from the options, the payoff from that. So if he's dinged with this overtime thing, then he don't have to use options anymore, I guess. You could just say that's your pay.
Well,
the market may not let him do that.
Well, it's actually almost worse. I mean, he's going to be like, I can't afford to do that, so I'm going to have to let you go.
Yeah.
That's actually the reality.
Or, worse, I'll farm it all out overseas.
Right. I mean,
you could even think back to when Bernie Marcus started the Home Depot. I mean, the folks that worked for him in the early days with the first stores opening, they were working hard at, 100 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And, Bernie tells us these stories. Well, they did it with the hopes of making a successful business and having a payoff. And there were many people in those early days when the company went public that started out in cashier and pushing shopping carts that really benefited from those early days and those long hours.
I mean, one thing we fundamentally agree on is hard work needs to be rewarded, period.
Mm-hmm.
Allow the market to dictate how that actually happens. Again, whether it's through profit share, whether it's through equity, right? I mean, allow the market to do that. People will take those risks. We're all adults. We can make those decisions, right? Don't force that upon, the small business owners and the folks who are trying to build, entrepreneurs, for example, that are trying to build a new business out of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're saying is, yeah, absolutely, reward hard work, but again, allow the market to work through that itself.
Right, and educate the small business owners of different comp alternatives that
Correct.
are out there.
Correct.
Because a lot of us don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard a presentation from one of these executive comp firms, but oh my gosh, you got to have a doctorate just to sit through one of them. It seems like.
Right. I mean, I personally, when I started my small business, I hired 3 people. I didn't have, the ability to go on a major payroll, so I gave them parts of my company right off the bat.
Sure.
I mean,
and they probably worked their,
and they did, didn't they? Because they knew they were going to be, benefit from that, from the hard work.
We've also heard a lot of from the restaurant industry. There are folks who start out in fast food restaurants, they work their way up in restaurants, and they end up managing the restaurants. Those types of positions are being impacted by the overtime rule significantly as well. We were told of one of the stories from one of our members who is a franchisee owner of restaurants, and said that when his employee was moved into a salaried position, a manager salaried position, he was actually approved for his first mortgage. It made the difference. So the benefits from going hourly to salary are more than just the flexibility, but the bank saw him as a good credit risk at that point, and he was able to buy his first house.
Sure.
Because there's consistency of income.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a whole lot less explaining you have to do to the underwriter.
Correct.
And now the underwriters, they've got to validate income every way till Tuesday, so it's really tough. And it's almost impossible for a small business owner that relies on K-1 income to get a mortgage these days, unless it's like 3 or 4 years sustainable type of income.
Correct.
So, and then the guy that goes out and buys and sells, got a lot of cash, making a lot of money, but as far as a mortgage, it doesn't count because it's not sustainable. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that just is going on that a lot of people don't know about, and it's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm. We agree. It's a challenge overall, and I mean, again, we're happy to be able to have one of those planks again be the lack of access to credit. That one is still being developed, and we're working on that one.
Okay, well, good. Well, listen, that's it for today. The time runs quickly.
It does.
In this room. Why don't you all give a parting thought?
Elaine?
Small businesses are too big to fail, and we're thrilled to be another voice in this battle to help educate employers on how they can talk to their employees about these issues, because they are the first and last line of defense.
DefendMainStreet.com. Do you want to talk about that for 2 seconds?
Your listeners can go to DefendMainStreet.com, and they can see the campaign. They can join the campaign, and they can support the campaign.
Okay, good. I'll put that out on my LinkedIn and a couple other places. Great. Alfredo, you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. As you can tell, my throat is almost gone here, so I apologize, Joe.
And by the way, Embassy signed up to be one of the sponsors for your tour, so we're very excited about that.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate the opportunity to help, because I think people get the word out. Everybody's going to help an organization like yours.
Absolutely. Thank you again for the support.
Sure.
We appreciate the opportunity to speak here.
Well, that's the show for today, and it's been a good show. I appreciate you all coming. We'll do this again. I still have questions, but we can do that the next time you come on. So that's the show. You've been listening to On the Money. It's the #1 small business show on Business Radio X. I should tell you that the last time we looked at stats, as anywhere from 80 to 400,000 people will end up listening or watching this show. That's staggering. I appreciate it, and the bank appreciates it, and I'm glad we can help. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at @on_the_money and then the number 1. You can listen to any of our shows anytime by visiting onthemoney.businessradiox.com and download our shows on iTunes. We're also out there with a video component, and that's done thanks to Trey. That's done extremely well, very high quality. It comes across very well. You go to Business Radio X Gwinnett YouTube channel. And before we get into our closing statements, just a shout out to our producer, Mike Salmon. I hope you're not getting hit by mosquitoes while you're down there, and can't wait for you to get back. Anyway, all right. Until next time, this is Joe Moss at Embassy National Bank. And just remember, be careful out there. It's a tough world. Leave fear in the back seat. All of our small business owners don't understand fear. Some do. But anyway, leave it in the back seat, move forward, and by all means, be yourself, stay authentic. That's the best way to sell anything, is by staying authentic. So with that, we'll do this next time, and thanks for listening.